Hello, my name is Andrew Havlovick, and this is my business project summary presentation for RS651 Business Plan Project. And the name of my project is Measuring IT Disposal Costs. So as an introduction to this project, it's important to understand that information technology, or IT, is important for businesses. Businesses of all shapes and sizes use IT as a way to enhance what their business does in its business operations. And this includes the usage of computers, laptops, and peripherals, or mice, keyboards, that kind of stuff, which is the way that IT services are delivered to IT customers, which are employees or end users. And I work in the information technology department at Company XYZ, which is a Wisconsin-based Fortune 500 manufacturing company. And the reason this project was what I chose is because currently there is no visibility into disposal quantities and costs at my company. When information technology is retired, when computers or laptops or keyboards or monitors are no longer being used, they're disposed of. And the reason I wanted to do this study was to figure out what is being done with this hardware, and is this the best thing that's being done to dispose of it for the company's sake in terms of cost effectiveness and efficiency. So the main point of this project is that I'm aiming to fill the gap that is shown by the fact that there is no visibility into the disposal quantities and costs. So as background to this project, there's a concept called the IT asset lifecycle, and that is 4 stages. The first is procurement, which is when the IT asset or computer hardware, laptop, keyboard is purchased. Delivery is when it is set up and sent to the customer. Support is during the usage of the IT asset. So let's say a laptop computer. It's procured at a certain time from a certain vendor, and then it is set up with company software, and then is delivered to the customer who actually starts using it. And that employee will use that laptop for a given amount of time, either until it breaks or until they get a new laptop. And during that time, the laptop is in what's called the support phase, where it is being supported by the company. But after the support phase is where the retirement phase kicks in. And the retirement phase is where at company XYZ there's a lack of business attention. And the literature does show that there's a lack of business attention to the retirement phase at a lot of companies because it's kind of an afterthought. And reasons for that is because it is so difficult to keep track of IT assets. Some of the other literature has shown that IT assets are not technically, in financial terms, categorized as assets. They're categorized as expenses, whereas capital is depreciated over time. Some companies will have, let's say, a $5,000 capitalization limit. So if an IT asset like a laptop costs less than $5,000, which most do, then it's categorized as an expense, and a one-time charge is in the books for that equipment. And after that point, it's no longer really tracked. And because of that, it kind of falls off the radar. And that happens to a lot of different companies. And Company XYZ is one of those companies as well. So there are also industry retirement options. And the literature shows that there are really 5 different options. The first 2 are refurbishing for internal use or giving used components away to employees. But the problem is that this takes too much time, both logistically and administratively, and concerns of who's getting the equipment, if it's a laptop or a desktop computer, how do we make sure the data is wiped? Can we really guarantee that it's gone? And if we're doing this, someone has to clean these up to give away. So for most companies, especially larger Fortune 500 companies, this kind of way of disposing of IT hardware is not recommended. However, the other 3 options that could work for Company XYZ are donations, where the computer hardware and peripherals are given away to other companies or to other organizations. Recycling, which is where the IT hardware and peripherals are actually taken to a recycling company or picked up by a recycling company, and that company disposes of them in accordance with environmental regulations. And finally, there is an option for resale where company XYZ would actually actively market their IT hardware and peripherals and try to resell them to someone else. So in this research study, the methodology was split into two parts. And before I was able to begin research, a key to this research study was a restriction placed by company XYZ. In order to protect company confidential information, only the IT hardware type and condition of equipment could be disclosed. So no models, no manufacturers, no initial costs could be disclosed. And the other restriction was that in my research, I was not able to utilize any company XYZ resource, including a person, a human resource, to aid me in my work. So it had to be entirely my own effort. And like I mentioned, there were two research aspects. And the first is disposal measurement, which includes a longitudinal research design and took place over 29 days between July 29th and August 27th, 2014. And this is where the data was manually collected into a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. And there ended up being a total of 359 items measured. And a longitudinal research design was chosen because to measure this kind of data, it's not something that can be done in one day and extrapolated over the course of an entire year. It takes time to really get a sense of how much IT hardware is disposed of because it's not all disposed of at one time. And at company XYZ, it's kind of a come as it whenever it's ready. So if someone calls and says they have some equipment to dispose of, that's when it is disposed of. There isn't a set cycle when it is collected. And then quantitative and qualitative analysis were both required. Based on the data that was collected, the quantitative analysis included functions like what the type of data was. However, qualitative analysis was especially useful when analyzing the condition of the IT hardware because the condition can be subjective. In this case, categorizations such as how dirty or clean the hardware was, whether it was new or whether it was used or like new condition, and that all takes effort to be able to really distinguish, is it like new, does it look dirty or clean, without creating a very complicated set of guidelines for what square number of square inches on that hardware is dirty, and then it's considered dirty versus clean. So that's where qualitative analysis came in and used my perspective as a researcher to fill in that data without taking an additional 2 or 3 times as long to gather that data. And like I mentioned, a total of 359 items ended up being measured over the 29-day period. The second part of the research design was disposal options in the local area of company XYZ. And this took a cross-sectional research design, which meant that at a given point in time, vendors for disposal options were contacted in the local area of company XYZ. And this was done in July and August 2014. And the data was gathered either by phone, by talking to representatives from these vendors, or from the vendor websites. And this also required quantitative and qualitative analysis, quantitative as in pricing information, and qualitative analysis based on certifications or other information found on their websites or from speaking with the representatives. And there were a total of 4 vendors who were analyzed in this research project. And after going through and collecting the primary data, it was determined that there was a use for supplemental data because in the vendor disposal cost measurement, not all vendors measure their disposal costs in the same way. 2 of the vendors measure the cost per item type. So for example, a monitor has a charge with some vendors of between $5 and $10 because of dangerous heavy metals in the the item that need to be require a charge to be disposed of, while other items have no charge whatsoever, like a keyboard or a network cable, no charge to dispose of those. One vendor measured cost per pound, which was per weight depending on the type of item. So certain items were 10 cents a pound, certain items were 15 cents per pound. And then the last vendor did cost per volume. So it was measured in a box on a pallet, 48 by 48 by 52-inch box on a pallet. And that was measured as cost per that volume on the pallet. So to make the data work with what was found for disposal vendors, the weight was needed for all 40 items of the different item types. And then the volume was needed for 25 of those items. And the reason it was 25 is that 15 of those were cable type items, which did not necessarily need to have their volume measured because cables can fit in between other larger items. So in the beginning of the vendor analysis, I decided to measure each vendor independently and take the data from the disposal measurement at company XYZ and fit it into each vendor. And I used an Excel spreadsheet that did auto calculations based on whatever functions were required. So with vendor A, the disposal cost was by weight, so per pound. And there were additional delivery and sorting fees. And this vendor A was a small company with one certification that was told to me from a representative on the phone, and the name of that certification was unknown, and I was not able to find that information. And in total, based on the total weight of the items of 401 pounds and a distance of the vendor of 35.8 miles, it ended up being a total disposal cost of $92.41 based on the 350 or so items that were collected over the research study. Vendor B measured disposal cost by volume, which was the 48-inch by 48-inch by 52-inch box. And there were no additional fees for this vendor. There were no delivery fees or pickup fees or sorting fees. And this is a large international company with 5 well-known certifications. And the total disposal cost of this company was $399. Vendor C measured disposal cost per item. And with most items, there were no charge. There were a few items that did have a charge, like I mentioned before. Certain monitors have mercury or other heavy elements in them that do require a charge. And then also vendor C requires a pickup fee for them to actually come and pick up the IT equipment. It is a medium-sized company, but they do not advertise that they have any certifications, environmental or other certifications. And the total disposal cost with vendor C was $175. And finally, with vendor D, disposal costs were also measured per item. And with most items, similar to vendor C, there were no charge. There was a cost for monitors and other heavy metal items, and it did require a pickup fee. It is a small company, and they do have one environmental certification, and the total disposal cost of this company was the same as vendor C, $175. So to make this make more sense, I did an extrapolated vendor analysis, which was based on benchmarking vendor B. Vendor B had a pallet-sized box of a given volume, and given the amount of IT hardware that was disposed of over the 29-day period, there was a lot of room left in this pallet-sized box. So this was the only vendor where the measurement was not based on how many items there were. It was the only one measured on how much could fit into this one box. So what I did is I extrapolated the volume and divided the volume taken by the amount of collected volume of the IT hardware and peripherals, and how many times that would have to be repeated to fit into that entire box. And it turns out the number was 3.08. So it would have taken about three 29-day periods to fill the box, so roughly 3 months. So what I did to extrapolate the data was to take the equipment quantities and multiply them by 3.08 and then recalculate with vendors A, C, and D to see what the new costs would have been. And you can see from the screen the cost would have been for vendor A $242 and vendors C and D would have increased to $226 and $382 respectively. So based on this analysis, my recommendation for company XYZ's vendor was vendor B. And there were a number of reasons for this. Vendor B is the largest company, which means that they have the highest visibility in the industry. And this is more of a concept with any larger company. From a security standpoint, a larger company is going to be more at risk, not only because they have more money, but because they are larger and there's more ways that the company could be hacked or company could be robbed or things like that. But if with this company is the largest company, there is also a bigger chance that if they make any environmental or recycling or disposal missteps, that this will be discovered and found out, which makes them have more incentive to not cause any issues. So going with the largest company has an inherent higher visibility into the company's operations. And vendor B also has the most certifications out of the four vendors. They have five, and these do include a number of well-known certifications, including the Basel Action Network, eStewards R2, the RIOS, the ISO 9001-2008, and ISO 14001-2004 certifications. And there would be easy administration with vendor B. With vendor A, C, and D, there is a requirement to measure at least per item or sort the items or do other administrative tasks to prepare them to be counted. With vendor B, it's very easy. There's one box, there's no per item costs. Put everything you can into the box, and that's it. And the donation and resale options are not recommended. And the reason for this is that they would require significant time investment from company XYZ to be feasible. Whereas donation, it is required that the company keep track of the purchase information to be able to gain tax credits, which means that the company, if they bought a laptop in, let's say, 2010 and wanted to throw it away in 2014, they would have to know specifically for that laptop how much it cost and keep that data throughout those 4 years. And that's required for the company to get any tax credits based on that donation. So donation is not recommended. Resale as well is not recommended based on the amount of time it would take to refurbish the items and make them ready for sale. And it's in both of these cases, it's unlikely that these disposal options would outweigh the disposal fee, which in this case is about $399 every 3 months, which is a relatively small disposal fee. In conclusion, the future implications for this research do leave a gap for additional research into mobile devices. This research project did not look at iPads or iPhones or other kinds of tablets, smartphones that are in use by company XYZ. And there's always a lot of room for research into that growing field. And this research project, in conclusion, has provided visibility into company XYZ IT hardware disposal processes and has recommended vendor B as this best disposal option for company XYZ.